Hi, this is Deena Thomson, author of Fallen Poppies, and this is Chapter 25. And this is Chapter 26.
Chapter 25. I hope Mrs. Wood won't be mad because we're late. Mara Joy leisurely walked beside her little brother. The boy kicked a bent can into the empty street grumpily. He had no reason to cry. The crisis was over, and no one cared if he cried anymore. "She better not, or I'll get Pappy's gun and shoot her dead," snarled Alan Michael. His scrapes kept stinging, and if Mara Joy didn't slow down, he was going to fall again and split his knees open once more. She threw back her head, snickering with amusement, her hand flying up to her nose. "That would solve all our problems, little brother. It sure would, if only you could." She grabbed her brother's hand and started to run, dragging a cranky, stumbling Alan Michael behind her. His mind tried to digest Mara Joy's words, but he was lost in his murky thoughts. The only thing that came through clearly was the crisp tones of her voice saying, "That would solve all our problems." They reached the schoolhouse in short time and strutted into the classroom. Mrs. Wood, a recent widow after a 30-year marriage to a kind but loveless man, turned from her lesson to stare at the two late children. She was 58 and had been a teacher for nearly 25 years. She had seen many kinds of children in her time, but none were as rotten as the two who had just ambled in. "Why are you late?" the elderly woman hissed, her eyes bulging. Unconsciously, she pushed her bifocals up her nose and placed a strand of white hair behind her ear. "I have a note," Mara Joy said dismissively, handing the slip of paper. "My mother wrote it. If you, and I doubt you will, have a problem with it, talk to her." Mara Joy smiled wickedly into the stern eyes of her teacher. She turned to her seat and sat down with the rest of the children. "That girl," Mrs. Olga Wood steamed. "She is just a horror. She and her brother. How was it that they were so terrible and the three other children such sweet young girls?" Mrs. Wood sighed. It didn't really matter. She didn't care to think about Mara Joy or her siblings. All Olga Wood wanted was to finish the day and go home. She was a sad woman, lonely for human contact other than the children she taught. "Maybe I will call Mary and see if her offer to live with her is still open," Olga Woods thought. Mary was Olga's daughter. She was a teacher in the next county. Anything would be better than every day with these brats. Mrs. Wood shook her head and turned back to the blackboard to finish her lesson. Joanna watched Mara Joy intently. She felt herself heat up with anger. Alan Michael sat at his desk in the corner, away from the other students. Mrs. Wood had put him there only a week ago. His desk would be placed there permanently until he could play nicely with the other children. He was prone to viciously attacking children smaller than him. How could Mr. Wood have ever climbed into bed with that old wrinkled bat? Mara Joy whispered into Joanna's ear as she sat down next to her. "Maybe that's what killed him." She chuckled as she took her books out and placed them on her desk. Joanna pretended not to hear her. "Oh, by the way, little sister, you are in deep shit." "Shut up. I'm sick of your voice," Joanna spit out. A strong urge to slap Mara Joy's perfect heart-shaped face overcame her. Mara Joy gasped, her mouth hanging open in shock. Joanna was becoming a little too sassy for her own good. "You just like to bury yourself deeper, don't you, little twit sister?" she hissed, crouching close to Joanna's beet-red face. Her lip curled into a sneer, and she huffed, content with herself. "Haven't you realized yet that you can't clash words with me because I will crush you?" Mara Joy sat up straight and satisfied, surveying her shapely, manicured nails. "Kinda like a bug," she smiled to herself. "I could be like you and just weasel my way out of trouble. Joanna whispered, looking blankly at the chalkboard. Mara Joy turned abruptly to Joanna's pale stone profile. She folded her arms tightly across her large breasts. Like everything about Mara Joy, her body had seasoned into a perfect figure 8. On the other hand, Joanna was lean with breasts only starting to bud and hips just beginning to curve. Joanna turned gently to look at Mara Joy's surprised face. "Just like you did when you had Frank Parkins in the back of the barn when you were 10, you were showing him your breasts and letting him touch them. I would never have lied for you if Shauna and Oliver hadn't shown up." "Listen here!" Mara Joy stifled, trying not to yell. She squeezed Joanna's arm tightly, digging her nails into her soft skin. "You don't make threats to me. Who do you think Mama is going to believe? You or me? You think about that before you even dare to think to threaten me. Remember, you are notorious for trying to get me into trouble." Joanna tugged on her arm, trying to break free of Mara Joy's painful grasp. She could see tiny droplets of blood escape between the tightly gripped fingers. Mara Joy abruptly released her clutch on Joanna's arm, causing her to lose her balance and teeter backward on her chair. She sneered as Joanna flapped her arms aimlessly, struggling to regain her balance. "Quiet!" hollered Mrs. Wood. "You two girls, if you cannot stop bickering and disturbing the rest of us, you can stay after class." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wood," Mara Joy said in a clear voice as she stood up straight from her seat. All eyes turned to see what she was going to do next. Even Mrs. Wood held her breath, dreading the worst. She was in no mood for this smart-mouthed little deviant today. "My sister is bothering me. Can I be moved, please?" She exhaled heavily, her chest swelling. Joanna rubbed her arm. It ached where Mara Joy had grasped it. Yes, anything to finish up the day without any more distractions." Mrs. Wood huffed, her hands flying in the air irritably. "Go sit beside Pauline. Constance, you sit with Joanna." Mara Joy scooped up her books and sauntered over to Pauline, who had just realized the lesson was disrupted. She had been daydreaming about running in a field of wildflowers when she felt Constance stand up and walk toward Joanna. She wrinkled her forehead, confused, when Mara Joy flopped into Constance's empty seat. She didn't bother looking at her youngest sister. She just glared at Joanna, who was speaking softly to Constance. Why did Joanna always get the best of her? "I will get her one day," Joanna scowled, her fists clenched tightly under her desk. "Take it easy." Constance's calm, soothing voice penetrated Joanna's thick aura of anger. A firm hand patted Joanna's shoulder. "She is not worth getting angry over." "She just gets to me," Joanna spat through clenched teeth. "There is nothing you can do about it now, so why let her see you frustrated and mad? It's a losing battle." Joanna nodded in agreement and surrendered back to her studies, wishing she could do something to hurt Mara Joy as she had hurt her. With a gleam in her eye and a skip in her step, Mara Joy radiated excitement as she hollered to her parents, "Mama, Pappy, I'm leaving for the party." "All right, dear. Remember, home by 9. Jo Beth answered her from Alan's bedroom. "Right," Mara Joy said, rolling her eyes while straightening her blouse. "You better," Alan grumbled from behind Jo Beth. "I will, Pappy," Mara Joy chirped. She opened the door and quickly left before her father could say more. He was not as easy to persuade as her mother was. Her heart was racing with anticipation as she stepped out into the cool night air, feeling the buzz of the upcoming event coursing through her veins. "I really don't agree with you permitting Mara Joy to go to parties," Alan said, sitting on their bed and fumbling with his tie. Jo Beth was situated at the vanity, clipping her pearl earrings on. She smiled at his reflection in the mirror. Her earring secure, she stood and went to him on the bed. Crawling up behind him, JoBeth wrapped her arms around his shoulders and began to fix his tie, watching him in the mirror as she manipulated the silky material. "Alan, it is 1920. Times are changing." JoBeth kissed his ear lovingly. He smelled clean and fresh from his bath. She could not help herself from warming up with desire for him. "Time's changing. Bah! She is just 15. Alan grumbled, not liking his girls growing up so fast. JoBeth quickly interrupted. "It seemed like we were adults when we were that age. I fell in love with you." She caressed his ear with her finger, stroking the lobe up and down gently. "You weren't 15 when we married, and neither was I. Besides," Alan turned to look into his wife's eyes with a tenderness that belied the years they had been together. His hands, warm and strong, encircled her waist, pulling her close until their bodies touched. "We were not as lucky as Mara Joy. We didn't have the luxury of being children." JoBeth smiled down at Alan and ran her fingers through his hair. He closed his eyes and thrust back his head. He groaned, lifting his face and nuzzling it between her breasts. "I want you." "The children, and we have to get to the dance." JoBeth shuddered, her heart racing as Alan's calloused hands ran up her torso and began to undo the buttons of her blouse. "Shauna and Oliver are waiting." He paused and looked into her eyes. His usual gentle gaze was replaced with an insatiable hunger. He growled greedily as he cupped each breast, bending his head and kissing them. The feel of his lips on her bare skin made JoBeth gasp and shudder as warmth coursed through her body. "They can wait." The muffled voice of Alan vibrated against her flesh, hot and electrifying. She breathed deeply as she removed her blouse and lay back on the bed. He leaned over her and kissed her warmly on the mouth. Gently, he glided his fingers along the zipper of her skirt, pulling it down with practiced ease, and slid it down her legs, leaving behind a trail of goosebumps. His voice was barely audible, but the intensity of his words was unmistakable as he murmured, "I love you." Her breath came out in a long sigh as she reached out and pulled him close, desperate to be filled with him. Chapter 26. "You are finally here!" The red-haired girl standing in the doorway shrieked. Mara Joy smiled wickedly up at her friend, Lauren. "Of course I'm here. More importantly, is he here?" she asked, coolly walking into the house. "Everyone is here." Lauren giggled, unable to control her excitement. She straightened her sleeveless yellow dress unconsciously. She was an attractive girl with deep auburn hair and gray oval eyes. Mara Joy looked spectacular. Her lush black hair hung in coils around her shoulders. She wore a slim-fitting dress of royal blue that shaped her figure perfectly. The blue in her dress accentuated her eyes, making them jump out of her creamy-colored face. Lauren had spent all her money that day on a new perm, hoping to capture some of the waves Mara Joy had naturally inherited. She'd been pleased with the red curls, and before her friend's arrival, she had been the center of the boys' attention. Lauren had hoped that tonight she would be the envy of all girls. But she knew at once when she saw Mara Joy that the spotlight would be on her friend and off of her. "Well, my lord, you look quite striking," Mara Joy said as she surveyed her friend. She removed her hat and shawl and deposited them in the girl's waiting arms. "As always, you outdid yourself," Lauren sighed, taking Mara Joy's apparel and placing them in the closet with the other guests' coats. "Please, I just threw this outfit on," Mara Joy said, looking in the hallway mirror. Satisfied with herself, she turned to Lauren. "Well, is he here?" she demanded, her hands resting on her tiny waist. Is Chad here? Yes, and he has been asking for you, Lauren giggled. Absolutely marvelous. Let's make our way to the celebration. My fans await, she declared, waving her hand theatrically through the air. She looped her arm through Lauren's and pulled the girl along with her. You are a tease, Lauren laughed, squeezing Mara Joy's arm and heading for the cellar door. Al Jolson's music and the smell of cigarette smoke flooded the stairs. Lauren's parents were sitting in the kitchen having their own little party. Flushed with excitement, Mara Joy waved at them as the girls descended the stairs. The adults returned her wave with a big smile. Pleasant child, Lauren's mother commented. She drank from her glass of whiskey, ice clinking, as she lit a cigarette. Yes indeed, replied Lauren's father, as he observed the raven-haired girl's young body wiggle down the cellar stairs. He could feel himself stiffen under the table and placed his hand down to cover it. If his wife saw what that girl did to him, there would be no end to the yelling. Mara Joy wouldn't be able to come to see Lauren anymore, and he would no longer get to see that luscious body parade around his home. He thought to himself what it would be like to screw his daughter's young friend. It would be nothing like those damn whores he picked up. He could imagine her perky breasts ripe in his hands. Just the thought made him groan aloud. Something wrong, dear? Sarah, Lauren's mother, queried. Nothing, dear, Lauren's father, Harv, murmured. He couldn't stop the throbbing in his pants. Let's go upstairs, Sarah. Surprised, Sarah looked at her husband, her cigarette suspended in midair as it hung from her gaping mouth. Not often did Harv want to make love to her. She didn't even bother asking for it anymore. That was okay. She had her best friend Sue and her husband. She didn't need her husband to fulfill her hunger when Sue and Bill were all too glad to do so. But his request took her by surprise, so she nodded and followed her overweight husband up the stairs. The air was thick in the cellar with smoke and loud music. A tinge of air, now and then, reeked of alcohol. Mara Joy spotted some friends and went to sit with them as Lauren went and locked the door. Mara Joy was pleased. She didn't want Mr. Smith, Lauren's father, down there. She enjoyed the way he looked at her, but she was not interested in an obese old man for a lover. She wanted Chad, and she was going to have him. She looked around the room, brimming with people. Most of the faces were familiar, friends from school and people from around town. She couldn't spot Chad anywhere. Hey, Mara Joy, a deep voice declared behind her. She pivoted around with a bewitching smile spreading across her face. There he was, Chad. He was leaning against a wall, smoking a cigarette with one hand and holding a jug of whiskey in his other. "Hello, stranger," she said coyly. Her friends beside her started to giggle and whisper to each other. Chad pretended not to notice the twittering girls and stood perusing Mara Joy, looking very charming. She felt her cheeks flush. His dark brown hair was too long, falling across his forehead, nearly covering his striking blue-green eyes. He flashed a mischievous smile that lit up his angular face, revealing an air of debonair charm that left all the girls in a swoon, including her. The music changed to a seductive waltz, and the crowd rose to their feet to sway to the melody. With his piercing gaze and devilish smirk, Chad extinguished his cigarette in a nearby ashtray and turned to Mara Joy, his eyes filled with an irresistible allure. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, his voice a low, throaty whisper that sent shivers down her spine. Mara Joy's heart raced as she took in his rugged good looks, and without hesitation she accepted his outstretched hand. "I would be honored," she replied in a sultry voice that dripped with desire. Chad placed the jug of whiskey on a nearby table and, taking her delicate hand in his, led her to the center of the room. With a firm yet gentle grip, He pulled her close, his strong arms enveloping her in a tight embrace. As they began to move, Mara Joy felt lost in the moment, caught up in the rhythm of the music and the powerful pull of Chad's body. It was as though they were the only two people in the room, locked in a passionate dance that threatened to consume them both. They danced together until 8 o'clock, paying attention only to each other. Chad then led Mara Joy up the stairs and out into the yard. Lauren's parents were nowhere in sight. "Wait!" Mara Joy stalled outside the house. A wind blew cold against her. "My shawl and hat." "Be back in a minute." He gallantly disappeared into the house, only to return shortly. "My lady," he exclaimed, bending and relinquishing her garments. Mara Joy placed the hat on her head. "Would you help me put my shawl on?" She turned around, sweeping her hair off to the side, exposing her creamy neck. He placed the delicate material over her pretty shoulders. It draped like silk gauze, hugging her body perfectly. Taking his hand, Mara Joy raised her heavy-lidded eyes up to his. Chad's pulse raced as he gazed into her steel-blue eyes that seemed to pierce through his soul. They strolled towards a cluster of bushes where secluded benches awaited. Choosing the farthest one from prying eyes, they sat down. Their bodies were mere inches apart. He needed to touch her. He felt his heart race, admiring the perfect curve of her slender fingers and the shape of her nails. She was a goddess, flawlessly crafted, and he was powerless to resist her allure. No girl he knew was made like her. "When do you have to be home?" he asked, wondering if she knew he was trying to decide how to kiss her. He felt awkward, which was unlike him. In the clubs, the girls expected you to pet them, but tonight was different. He wasn't here for just any girl. His eyes fixated on Mara Joy, a stunning beauty with a fierce look in her eyes. What was she expecting? She seemed too perfect, unapproachable, yet he couldn't resist her pull on him. The thought of touching her sent shivers down his spine, but he didn't want to scare her away. He could feel the heat between them, but knew he had to play it cool. He couldn't afford to make a misstep, not with Mara Joy. He wanted her to be his girl, to claim her as his own. Just when he lost his courage, she leaned in close, her breath hot and intoxicating. "Kiss me, Chad," she whispered. His heart pounded as he swiveled toward her, his eyes locked on hers. He leaned in slowly, savoring the moment, and kissed her gently on the lips. She exhaled softly, and he felt her melt into him. The taste of her lips was sweet, and he wanted more. Without hesitation, he kissed her again, this time with a passion he had never known. Mara Joy was his, and he was hers, in that moment, and forever. "So wonderful," she gasped as his lips began working down her neck. "Kiss me hard on the lips." Chad obeyed but opened his mouth over hers. Willingly, she opened hers in response, taking his tongue hungrily. Mara Joy moaned ecstatically as Chad's muscular physique pressed down on her. She wanted to merge with him, to become one with his body. The desire rising in her made her feel something she had not felt before, and she liked it. She liked it a lot and wanted more. "I feel strange. My body is trembling on the inside," she mewed, squirming beneath his heaving body. She couldn't seem to get close enough to him, even when she pulled him to her, pressing him hard against her. "Is this love, Chad? This feeling?" "I need you, Mara Joy. Above all else, I need and want you." His husky whispers tickled her neck, his desire washing his fear away. His hands went behind her back, wanting to unbutton her dress. He leaned down on the bench with Mara Joy beneath him. He breathed into her ear, trying to control his body. Her groans echoed in the cool night air, pleasure spurred on by his heaving body. She reached out, pulling him closer to her, kissing him passionately. Never had she wanted something so badly. The feelings flooding her body were new and exciting. There was no turning back. She didn't want to. This was her destiny. She reached down between their crushing bodies. Chad's eyes darted up, confused as she undid his pants, releasing his pent-up excitement. "Are you sure?" He looked down at her, quivering. The little control he had waning. She grasped between his legs, guiding him easily to her. Sweat glistened on his skin as he pinned her underneath him, his muscles straining as he thrust himself inside her, and then did so again. The pleasure of his body filled her with a warm, murky delirium. She couldn't get close enough to him, her body yearning for more of his touch, and she arched her back, exposing herself raw and defenseless. Her body was no longer under her control. Her nails dug into his back as he drove her to the brink of ecstasy again and again, her cries growing louder with each passing moment. The air was thick with the scent of passion and desire as their bodies melded together in a primal dance that left them both gasping for breath. Minutes passed, and all that could be heard was heavy breathing and the creaking of the bench as the two young people meshed together into one. Chad pulled a panting Mara Joy tightly to his bare chest as they reached a climax at the same time, falling exhausted and spent into each other's arms on the cold, hard bench. Time stood still. The night sounds whirling around, ignored by the two half-naked youths tangled in each other's arms. There was no going back. Everything changed.